So, hi David, welcome back. Now I would like to know, with your JDBC shop and Perl. So, what I learned is you started to generate some Java code with Perl as well, right?
Yeah, yeah. I really got into generating code. I still do that to this day. It's
Okay,
a permanent. Not necessarily Perl, but Bash,
okay,
or just generating code in any way you can.
mhm,
If I were to give a tip to people, I would say you get really comfortable with Bash. Bash is
mhm,
your best friend,
mhm,
and if you have a test case that works and you want to change out the data
mhm,
to cover all your scenarios,
mhm,
or if you have a matrix problem where, for example, you want to test, you've got 20 REST endpoints. They each have a different name, and
mhm.
you want to test to see how they behave with a post, a put, a delete, a get, so on. You can you can do that really easily by generating that code. You make the one method that says assert when I send to this URL with this method, I get this response. It's
Okay,
one line, right?
mhm,
Make it so you can have like one assert statement that's long. You got to wrap up your assert statements. Obviously, you could say assert request,
mhm.
and you pass in those variables. You can go to the command line and in Bash, and you can write very easily something that will take the first series of potential values, the second series of potential values, and the third series of potential values, and and then it will basically expand it for you.
Mhm.
So you don't even need three loops.
Okay,
And so it's Bash has some amazing syntax. And so you give the first list of values, the second list of values, and the third list of values, and it will spit it all out
mhm.
in one long thing, and you've got it all generated.
That's interesting.
Or
You
you
could,
can or you can do like three loops too, but that's fine. If you know, it's really convenient.
yeah, I try to automate actually everything, not with Bash rather than with Z Shell, but I think it's no
Hey, it's the
different.
same. It's the
Yeah,
same. Yeah. You get
and
get comfortable with the scripting language in
yeah.
in Linux. Really comfortable with the scripting language in Linux.
And what I recognize is actually it is really a programming language, right? You can have
Totally.
functions, you can have if statements, you can have default parameters for arguments, let's say. So what I usually do, all my Maven scripts are wrapped with a shell or Z shell script. And why I'm doing this, not to forget things how they get invoked. So if I have a small project, usually I find build or run, and this contains whatever I need to run the project. So this was like documentation for me.
Totally. There's a you should automate everything. First of all, I have a very big habit. I got a tip from the people that I worked with at that previous job that I was talking about in the previous episode, Mike and Dave. That they never, you know, they never threw anything away.
Mm-hmm.
They kept all their scripts. That those were source code to them. They
Mm-hmm.
are because they're
Mm-hmm.
really critical to them because it was
Mm-hmm.
the secret of their productivity, right? To write all
Mm-hmm.
these things that did all this work.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the work that those things did was actually coding work, right? They didn't automate just turning systems on and off and deploying apps. They wrote, stuff to automate the generation of code. And so yeah, I put everything in my bin directory, and I've never deleted a single one ever. So I have like literally hundreds of scripts in
Mm-hmm.
my bin directory from the last 20 plus years of coding. And
Yeah.
yeah, don't ever delete anything. And if you've done anything more, if you have to do it more than once, sit down and write a script.
Yeah.
Do not just sit there and type that same command or repeat or hit the up arrow a bunch of times. Just write a script. You will be slower at first. At first, you'd be like, I can do it faster if I just type it out one by one. But eventually, you'll be faster writing the script than you could be typing it out one by one. There's a flip that happens.
Mm-hmm. But there
And
is
it's
one
worth it.
downside. If you start with a script, you don't learn, the underlying API a lot. For instance, I'm working with AWS or with Azure, and what I did at the beginning, I didn't write any scripts. I just use the CLI directly over and over again to see whether there are some patterns which I can memorize, and then I wrote the
Okay.
script. Otherwise, if you start with the script, you have no idea what actually happens after a while. But if are using the API for a while and then write a script,
Yeah.
then you never forget that. So this
You,
is what
Yeah. You absolutely, a big mistake is to automate something you've never gotten to do successfully once manually.
or not once, multiple times, because if you do it
Sure.
once, yeah,
At
exactly.
least once, right? You
At
got to
least,
have,
okay.
you have to have at least been able to do it once successfully manually. You have to know exactly where you're going, right?
Exactly.
Once you've gotten success to occur manually, complete success to your definition, then go ahead and script it up.
So what I tried is like almost like script driven development, like test driven development. So I started with the script and then automated this and just ignored the errors, then improved, and it worked. But I didn't learn anything. It just worked. So and then I changed the strategy. So
yeah,
interesting. So what happened in the company? So you built the most perfect JDBC driver, or what was the story?
Well, they did, and I was an understudy.
Okay.
They did. So they continued to work there. I got an opportunity. My friend from the previous banking gig that I was at, Richard Monson-Haefel, he contacted me a few months into that job, and he said, "Hey, I got an opportunity to work on an EJB container with this company, and it's an open source thing. Would you like to join me?" And my first question was, "What's open source?" So I had no idea at the time what it was. Richard had written a book for O'Reilly. He wrote the EJB book for O'Reilly, and so he was really famous at that time, and really prolific. I remember him while he was there at the banking gig, writing the book on the side, and him coming into work one day with his head like tilted to the side, he was like glued to the side. It was just stress had basically twisted his neck, and he couldn't straighten it out. Right? He just had his shoulder just seized up, and that's how much stress he was under. But he was such a good author, and is such a good author. Anyway, so he'd worked with EJ Boss just a little bit, and got recruited out of there to write an EJB container by Intalio. At the time, they were called Exolab. And so he contacted me because I was sort of like this young kid that was, up and coming, and he wanted me to be on his team. So I left the JDBC gig job to.
But how he found you? I mean, if you
we worked together at the banking gig.
Okay.
Yeah. So the job that I had, discussed in the previous one, where I wrote a web server and then became the swing guy. In my first year programming Java, he was there with me at that time, and we became friends. And so we were friends from that time period. And so when he got this opportunity to work on to create an EJB container in open source, he called me up and he asked me to join him, and I said yes. And I left the job that I was in writing JDBC drivers. Is only there like 4 months.
Okay.
So wasn't long, but so I started working. This was 1999. I left that job, JDBC driver. So I started working on openEJB in 1999 of December, and in 1999 of December is when Amelia and I were married. So my career in open source and my marriage started at the same time, which is really kind of symbolic because, as we discussed in the previous episode, at the end of my first year of college, I spent, $5,000, $2,500 on a computer, and $2,500 on a trip to Ecuador, and I became married to an Ecuadorian woman and went into software, and so this was like revisiting that symmetry again. The same month that I was married is the same month that I got into open source, and so I've been working on openEJB ever since, and now it's TomEE, of course. But that was my introduction into open source. Was back then working on co-founding openEJB with Richard.
What was the business model behind the open source EJB container? Because back then
Not much.
Okay.
Not much. So basically what happened was exolab, I forget which one was the Xoffice was the company, and exolab was the open source incubator. And at that time, exolab had OpenJMS. They had TireX, which is a transaction manager, OpenOrb, openEJB, and Castor, which was kind of like a persistence engine, right? An OR mapper. And the vision was to put it all together to make like an app server kind of environment in open source, or to take the open source components and make a proprietary app server. Because at the time, app servers were everywhere. This is December 1999, so there was WebLogic, of course, which is kicking butt. Bluestone,
Gemstone, Persistence Power Tier.
There's so many of them. It's difficult to remember all of the names. And so there was app servers being created. It seemed like every other day. So the vision of openEJB was, well, let's be an embeddable EJB container that these people creating app servers, they can just shove it into their stack, and they can get compliance with the EJB spec. And so we were, focused on being, embeddable. But yeah, in terms of business model, was no business model.
Okay.
So Xoffice eventually ended up running out of money and canceling most of their open source projects, including openEJB, and rebranding themselves as Intalio and got into BPM and went that direction. While the project was winding down, we started doing work with Apple, because Apple, this whole concept of we're going to write an EJB container that you can embed into your app server was really appealing to Apple, because they wanted WebObjects, which is an app server, but in Objective-C and things like that. They wanted to appeal to the Java community, so they wanted to write something. They wanted to basically expand WebObjects so that it could be a Java app server. So they took openEJB and OpenOrb, and they shoved it to TireX, and they shoved them together into WebObjects. And so I did a lot of work with Apple in the kind of like 2000 range. And so this was when, this was when the very first iMacs were coming out. When I say coming out, I mean like they weren't out yet.
Have you attended the Java 1 in the year 2000?
I did.
What I remember is they announced at Java 1 that the WebObject, they cut the cost from 50K to 5K, and Steve Jobs participated at Java 1. He was at the keynote with Scott McNeely.
Yeah, and openEJB was in WebObjects, and I wrote. It was crazy. It was a very surreal experience, because I was like 23 or 24.
Yeah.
And so it was a very surreal experience, because I had in my house an iMac before there were any commercials or anything for them. I had like OS X public beta number 1 on it, and the thing couldn't even connect to a network easily. And they were like, "Can you do some testing on that?" I'm like, the thing barely ran. So OS X public beta number 1 is the first version of OS X that I ever used. And so yeah, it was. I mean, like, I literally shoved the thing in my closet because it didn't work. It didn't work. But yeah, it was really crazy. So
did other people pick you because of openEJB? That they approached you and say, "Can we cooperate?" Or what was the story behind it?
Yeah. So they contacted Xoffice.
Okay.
And they basically paid Xoffice some money to for us to work with them to basically get openEJB and OpenOrb and TireX integrated into WebObjects. And the terms of the license we were using back then was like an Apache 1.0 style license, which had the attribution clause in it, which is not there anymore. the attribution clause basically said you can use it in a commercial setting, but you have to give us credit. And so on the side of the WebObjects box, openEJB was listed on the box. So it was really cool. It was good for me because, as discussed in the previous episode, I basically failed everything. I didn't even talk about it, but I didn't even have 4 years of high school. I basically dropped out after the third year because I wasn't going to finish in a time frame that would allowed me to. Yeah. I got an HSED and then went into college instead. Is basically instead of having 5 years of high school, I decided to split after 3 and go try to get into college, which I did. Anyway, so people would ask me how I would be from the Wisconsin, Minnesota area. So I'd be working in the Mall of America or something like that, and I might see a high school friend, and they would go, "Hey, what are you up to?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm pretty good." I would walk them over to the Apple store. I'd pick up the box. I would say, "I wrote that," and I'd point at openEJB, and I'd say, "I wrote that."
Mm-hmm.
They'd be like, "Wow!" And then I would go, "Oh, let's go over to the Barnes and Noble," and I had contributed to a book, object-oriented software, component-based software engineering kind of book. I'd written a chapter on EJB in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I would go, "No, let's go over to the Barnes and Noble," and I would pull the book off the shelf and I'd flip to my chapter and say, "I wrote that." It was crazy. So it was a really strange career high to have when you're like 23 or 24, especially when you've not done well in school for just like your whole time. That was really, really interesting.
How much you contributed to openEJB? Like 80% or
50?
50. Okay.
I mean, yeah, Richard and I, it was great. Richard was Richard was my mentor.
Okay.
Richard was the guy who, he boosted my career. I was able to do these things because Richard pulled me into these things. He pulled me into open source. He got me that book opportunity. People, Addison Wesley asked him to do that chapter in that book, and he said, "Well, I'm not available, but I know somebody who can do it." And he pulled me in. I mean, my first speaking opportunities, Richard was the guy who pushed me into those or pulled me into those. I spoke at Java 1 in 2000, and I was in a panel with Richard and myself to represent openEJB, Mark Fleury and Rickard Oberg to represent EJBoss at the time. And
this was crazy experience. The Java 1 2000 was like 30,000 attendees, right? So it was
Yeah, officially, I think they had to say it was 20,000 because of fire code.
Yeah,
and then they're like, wink, wink, wink. It's not.
Yeah, exactly.
They're like, the official number is 20,000. Wink, wink, wink. And they didn't really hide the winks. They were, yeah. So it was very crazy. So that was like life in 2000 for me. And then the September 11th, 2001 happened. And of course, the bubble burst. And I was totally out of work. And so it was kind of interesting. I actually am very kind of thankful in many ways that occurred because it's pretty easy for you to get like a big head about a lot of stuff. But I kind of like that I had a really high point in my career, like astronomically high. And then it'll just like, now you're a regular person again. And guess what? You're overqualified for every job that you could possibly apply for. So like, it was really difficult after that. But I eventually got into teaching and then we did Geronimo in 2003. But I had like a good year and a half of just like, grounding to the earth, and that was really good because it was like, this is how quickly things can go.
Yeah.
This is how awesome everything can be, and this is how quickly it can all be gone. So never take anything for granted and work your butt off all the time. So that was the lesson that I learned, which is a very good lesson to learn. And I think that's one of the reasons that I've stayed such a hard worker through all these different scenarios and different times. And because I understand it, I know that how ephemeral everything is. So you want to do something, you better do it. You better not wait.
Yeah, maybe not working rather than learning, right? Because we just work. It has to be somehow, I don't know, reasonable, right?
Oh, yeah, it's got to be both, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be both. Like, if I were to give some career advice to people, I would say that one of the things that I did very early was, I would take a job either for experience or money, but not try to do both. And so, as people might have heard in the previous podcast, if they listen to it, my first job I took only for experience, and I literally told them point blank, I don't care what you pay me. I just want to learn. Give me all the right opportunities. And then I doubled my salary, and I left and went and took a job for money. Yeah. So that was the thing. And then I switched again to taking a job for experience. And I alternated back and forth, experience to cash a few times, and it works out really well if you do it like that.
Yeah, but if you doubled, your salary and get another job, I guess you also learn something because it required more knowledge. So
yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah. Okay, so with the 2003 and openEJB, so what happened then? I mean, you just kept working on an open source openEJB, or stopped working, or what happened between 2001 and 2003?
Well, so basically, I kept working on it.
Yeah.
I forked the project over to SourceForge from Intalio because there was no funding for them to be worked on, and so I worked on it on my own dime from 2000, middle 2001, well onward, really. And so I started working on it on my own dime, and blew through my savings in a year or so. And then started doing teaching on the side. So I started doing training, like EJB training and that kind of things like that. And it was really interesting because, one of the first classes that I did was an EJB course, and I had my teacher, my first Java teacher, Gary Cagle, gave me a week-long training as my, at the beginning of my Java career. That was in 1998 or 97. And, 5 years or so later, his student is teaching him in EJB course, and he was and it was such a great experience for us both. He was so happy that he taught somebody who reached that level, and I was so honored to have the opportunity to teach him, and it was so cool. So I was actually working for two different training companies in the Minneapolis area, and eventually one of them was like, "How can we get you to be working with us exclusively?" And so they put me on retainer, and so I worked there with them and worked on openEJB on the side, and at that time, Dane Sundstrom, who had written the CMP engine for EJBoss, now at that time was finally JBoss, and he was in Minneapolis, and he had been coming to the local Twin Cities Java user groups to try and recruit me to work on JBoss. Every time I created an event, he would show up, and he was recruiting me to work on JBoss. So it was super annoying because I was there trying to recruit people to work on openEJB, and he was there trying to recruit me to work on JBoss, and it was just like, oh, there's that guy again.
Why we didn't say yes to JBoss?
Oh, they were at the time very aggressive people.
Okay.
And that is not my personality. They would do astroturfing. Mark Fleury was reading The Art of War and trying to use it on his competitors. I mean, it was real hostile stuff.
Okay.
And sending Dane to recruit me that aggressively like that, was
Mark spent some time at the military, actually. So
it's so this just super aggressive.
I interviewed Mark. You have to listen to the podcast. Actually.
Yeah,
it's really interesting. So
interesting guy. I mean, but
super interesting. You have to do this.
Yeah.
So
no, I'm quite aware of a lot of that history. For example, here's a story for your side of the podcast. Like at a certain point when Richard and I were working on openEJB, Richard Monson-Haefel, we had this whole, kind of like concept of containers that were abstracted out and could be swapped out. So there, like we treated the CMP engine as a container and the BMP engine as a container, stateless engine as a container, and we wrapped them all together, and we had an architecture when we labeled it, and this whole architecture could be embedded. So it was like all very clean API. So we're expecting people to put this stuff in their app servers. So it needed to be clear and understandable, right? And so at one point, Richard Oberg, who was Mark Fleury's right-hand man at the time, he says to us, "Hey, Richard, David, I'm leaving EJ Boss. I've had it. I'm fed up to here. I want to join your team." So for 2 weeks, we're onboarding Richard Oberg, and we're teaching him all the stuff and all the architecture and how everything works. And then he leaves, goes back to EJ Boss, and then they announce on the server side their new architecture.
Okay.
That's the kind of crap that was going on at the time. So why didn't I go work for them? Because we were like mortal enemies.
Okay. Okay. Interesting stuff,
Yeah. I didn't want to have anything to do with that kind of way of business. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So that's the kind of crazy stuff that would happen back then. Like people, like I say, it was really cutthroat, really, really aggressive. So much so that like later, as I was building TomEE and stuff like that, I developed a relationship with, the newer generation of JBoss people who are all really awesome. And, I made a point to reach olive branches out to them and create good relationships with all the other people, because I did not want us to go back to the days where people were literally lying, cheating, and stealing as much as they possibly could to get ahead. That that's
right. So
anyway, so Dane left JBoss, and I see him one day, and I'm expecting to get the JBoss sales pitch. Instead, I get a Geronimo sales pitch.
Okay.
And I'm like, what is this? What's it? Well, we want to create a new app server. A bunch of us got mad with JBoss. 5 of them left JBoss.
Okay.
Dane Sundstrom, Hiram Chirino, David Jenks, Jeremy Boynes. They were all on the JBoss team, and they left. We're sick of it. We're done.
Okay.
We're going to make a new app server. Do you want to come on board and do the EJB container of the app server? And I was like, well, that's a no-brainer. I don't want to compete with this thing. I'm going to join.
Which year was it? What year?
That was 2003.
Okay.
And so that's how Geronimo was created.
Okay.
So we all created Geronimo, and we continued to recruit many people. So
what was the business model, or who sponsored the entire thing?
We paid for it ourselves.
Okay. But what was the idea? I mean,
well, we were going to make a good competitor to JBoss and take their lunch.
Okay. With support and license. Or...
Yeah, well, sure. Just, or we'll see what happens. I mean, like at the time, there was no like business people involved. It was all coders, all coders. So there's no business plan at all. It's just like, we'll build the software and we'll figure out what happens after that. And so we got together. It was the 5 of us. We got James Strachan involved, Greg and Jan from Jetty. We got MX4J, which was like Simone Bordet and so lots of really good people to build Geronimo. And we announced it, and we had 2,000 people on our mailing list the first week, because we announced it on the server side, which is like the center of the Java community at that time.
Yeah.
And we had over 2,000 people on our mailing list in the first week, and we hadn't written a lick of code. We just announced our intentions.
Okay.
And that was probably the most foolish thing that we ever did, because then we just fought like crazy about whose architecture and whose ideas were going to win. Because we had assembled all these people who were luminaries in the open source community at the time, because all their components would fit together to make one big awesome Voltron. But we hadn't built the Voltron, and we announced the Voltron, and the whole world wanted the Voltron now. And so yeah, it was just a continuous fighting on Geronimo. It was just like, it didn't take much for JBoss to beat us, because we were competing with each other.
Okay.
And so we built. Geronimo did get built, but it was super, super, super over-engineered.
Yeah.
And it was really, really over-engineered. And I was on the losing battle a lot of these fights. It's like, at the time, I was still into the whole embeddable, hey man, if your stuff doesn't work in Java SE, it's too complicated. But the majority of the Geronimo people were like, traditional app server is the best. Boot it up, shove 50 apps in there, it's going to be awesome. And I was like, hey man, what about one app in a Java SE environment, and and guess what? The app server is like invisible. They're like, well, that's crazy talk.
What I remember is at the beginning, it was around 2000. I spent a lot of time in enterprise project in Germany, insurance companies, stuff like that. And what happened is that the companies usually bought, the Sun E10K. These were like servers that cost 1 million, and they had usually 2 or more of them because of clustering. And then they always bought an application server and put as many applications as they could, to save money.
Yeah.
So the origin idea of the all application servers, this was mainly WebSphere, interestingly, back then, was to put as many applications as possible on the application server. And the startup time and everything else was not an issue, because the idea was that all the departments will share cost about for the very expensive hardware. And later, it didn't make any sense. I would say 5 years later, 2005, 2006. Didn't make any sense anymore. Didn't make sense anymore. So I was
less sense.
Less sense. So I stopped doing the shared deployment, but all the architects and enterprise people, they actually forgot the origin idea why we did it, and they still kept years just have shared deployments to save the hardware costs, to save hardware costs. Like, why are you doing this? I mean, this is like
super.
Very cheap.
It's completely unnecessary. I mean, basically, for people who don't have a mental frame of reference, there was no Docker, there was no Kubernetes, there was no containerization, there was no easy way to take a big fat machine and split it up into smaller machines. There wasn't really anything easy to do that. And so the app server did that for you. And so it had so many responsibilities.
This is why you probably were not very successful with your approach, because
it was a bad time.
Yeah, bad time. You were too early.
Yeah, Dane's got a great quote which I like, which is, a good idea at the wrong time is tantamount to a bad idea.
Yeah,
exactly. And it's so true. It's so true. I'm the king of having the right idea at the wrong time.
Yeah.
I
think so.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what did it with Geronimo? What happened then? So it worked, kind of. I didn't like Geronimo, I have to say. I tried several times.
Or didn't?
No, didn't.
No, I never liked it.
Because I remember the UI was complicated somehow, and even JDBC driver was hard. There was too modular.
It was so modular. Like there was so much ceremony. Everything was a module, and you had to learn the module system. And I was like, hey man, let's try to make people's database connections for them, or make their JMS topics for them, or make their JMS queues for them. If their app says they need one, let's just make one with that name by default. And if they want something different, they can take some action. So I was very much like, get the thing to run using as many defaults as you can, and make it possible for people to change the defaults.
So that way, convention of a configuration before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was on the losing battle of that. And what we ended up implementing was, everybody has to explicitly state everything all the time in configuration for anything to work. And then let's do that on steroids. And so you had to have XML files that described everything, because no defaults could occur. So you were constantly copying and pasting the same name into the same from this field to that field, and so you have, because nothing would just line up. You had to do it all.
Mm-hmm.
Then get this. We would read those XML files in as a module. We would then serialize all those objects to disk so that the startup would be fast.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't look at those XML files again after the first time you gave them to us.
Mm-hmm.
We serialized your configuration down to disk. And so...
What Corpus is doing, right? They are reading XML and generating on-the-fly bytecode almost, right? So this was like the modern version.
It's worse. It's worse because at least... But it is a lot like that. Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's in principle, it's very, very similar, right? Mm-hmm. But it's worse because it's like the bytecode is one thing to generate. You can reload the bytecode with different values quite easily. Mm-hmm. But serialized data, you're serializing the bytecode, the structure. You're serializing your knowledge of the bytecode structure in the form of data of memory. So we're taking a snapshot of memory.
Yeah, but
writing that to disk.
But as you remember, this was actually the approach of EJB 1.0, right? So there was no XML descriptor. There was serialized descriptors. You remember that? You had to
that I fortunately dodged EJB 1.0 and got in at 1.1. So yeah, there was.
Then we are a little. So I have to say, I was a little bit afraid of the serialization, but what I remember at Java 1 2000 or 2000 actually, the O'Reilly book, Java and XML came out.
Yeah, it was written by Brett McLaughlin.
Exactly. And if I saw that, it's like now it's over. And we went back, and the first what happened was in an insurance company, developers tried to store XML in a database with metadata, everything in a table. And of course, it didn't work at all. It just, everything became bloated, and XML was everywhere. So in Germany, went crazy, around XML. And we had to write a lot of XML code, and which was unfortunate. I would say it stopped with Rails in 2006 with convention over configuration. So there was at least the idea out there that you can do something without configuration. And back to your problems with the convention over configuration, the argumentation or discussion was, if we do convention over configuration, no one knows the defaults. So it's a lot safer to configure everything, then you know what you have. But if there's no configuration, then the behavior is undefined. This was the discussions I had, to discuss in every project. Why was
the same discussion we had in Geronimo.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. I had, one of the first things, like the first thing that I wrote in openEJB was an implementation of Java serialization so that we could try to create a protocol that serialized EJB calls faster than WebLogic's T3.
Okay.
And we did get there. We got something that was faster than Java serialization by about 20%. Okay. But I was familiar with all the shortcomings of it.
Okay.
Like if you rename a field, you're screwed.
Yeah.
Suddenly you can't deserialize anymore because that field's gone, and now you just error out. The whole payload is worthless.
Yeah.
So so as configuration for an app server to run long term, I was like, this is a terrible idea.
It is.
Because they're going to go upgrade their app server and they won't be able to deserialize the previous configurations. Yeah. So if you apply a security patch, you upgrade from version 1.1.1.1 to 1.1.2, it might not work, right? And I still recall having lots of arguments with one of the guys in the project who I won't name, who just like, you're an idiot. He said to me, you don't know what you're talking about. It's like, I do. I wrote object serialization. I literally wrote my own implementation. I know it. I can know how easily it can be broken. And that's what Geronimo implemented.
Okay.
Anyway, so the business model question, we ended up joining a company called Gluecode. So the five of us who kind of were the core people. Myself, David Jenks, Jeremy Boynes, Dane Sundstrom, I guess there's four of us. We joined Gluecode, this company out in Los Angeles, and that's what got me out to Los Angeles, where I'm still living. And so the guy who started the company, Winston, he was a VC for Intel at one point.
Okay.
And he left. So he knew how to get capital. So he'd gotten investment for his company, Gluecode, but he didn't really have something to do with it. He didn't have a product, really. And so he saw all the activity around Geronimo and all the hype, and he's like, hey, do you guys want to come join Gluecode? I'll give you a bunch of stock, give you a bunch of the company, and then it will be the Geronimo company. So we did that, and not even a year later, we sold to IBM. And so then we all worked at IBM, and Geronimo became something that IBM was funding. And I stayed there for about 7 years.
Was it good that it was sold, or was it the hidden idea of the manager from Intel, or was it?
He had previously worked at Intel. He wasn't at Intel at the time,
No, but was it your hidden plan, to sell you to IBM again?
Well, we had actually gotten 2 offers. So first offer we got was from Computer Associates.
Okay.
So CA. So they were the first people to put offer on us. We turned it down, and the investors didn't like that, so they replaced Winston as the CEO, and they put in Chet Kapoor. And so under Chet, when IBM came and gave us an offer, we sold, and Chet went on to create Apache.
Okay.
So, and then Winston went on to create, 3 more open source companies because, we all knew the open source people at Apache, right? So, we tapped our friends on the shoulders and said, hey, man, do you want a company? Because our friend Winston, he's making companies for open source. So so after Geronimo and Gluecode, Winston and we hooked Winston up with Hiram Chirino and James Strachan and Rob Davies, who made Logic Blaze, which is the ActiveMQ company. Then we hooked up him up with Jason Van Zyl and Brett Porter. Bad mistake on my part. Brett Porter and Jason Van Zyl. So Jason Van Zyl is a creator from Maven, and so that was Mergier. And then there was a third company, which was Alan Cabrera and Simone Baudet, who was, they never really got too far. So those were the 3 companies after us. They didn't do nearly as well. It's really difficult to make an open source company.
Yeah.
Really, really difficult. So they didn't do nearly as well. So the ActiveMQ guys, they sold Logic Blaze to Progress Software. Progress Software spun them out as FuseSource. Then FuseSource was purchased by Red Hat. So that's where most of those people are. Rob Davies and James, they eventually left to CloudBees after a certain point. And then Jason Van Zyl ended up leaving Mergier to create a different Maven company because he just didn't like how things were running. So he left his Maven company he left the company, Winston had created for him to create his own Maven company, and that was Sonatype. So Jason created Sonatype, and then that's when Brian Fox got involved, who is now CTO of Sonatype. So, and at one point, Los Angeles was the center of all this activity.
Okay.
And so I remember there was one time we were having a dinner with all of these companies together because we were all friends. This is why we hooked them up. So we're having this huge dinner and we're looking around the table going, if a bomb hits this building right now, there's a lot of projects are going to die.
but everyone was involved in Geronimo in one point of time, right?
Well, it indirectly, right?
Yeah.
Indirectly. So when Geronimo was coming off, we were funded. We had Gluecode going on. At that same time, Winston had already been removed as the CEO of Gluecode and was working on his next companies. So we had Jason Van Zyl in Los Angeles on a regular basis. And so he was working on Maven 2 because Maven 1 was what we were currently using in Geronimo. And so he's working on Maven 2. And so we basically fed him like all of our requirements for what would be the most ideal build system. Like so.
Do you remember
So,
Jelly?
Unfortunately, I do.
This was a programming language. You have submit somewhere a conference talk about the new programming language in XML on YAML, something like YAML, with YAML.
Yeah, right. Yeah. In fact, Geir Magnuson was one of the people who worked on that, and I forgot to mention him, but he was one of the people in gluecode that was on the original Geronimo team. So yeah, but so we've fed Jason like lots of requirements for Maven 2, and in fact, he did the first one of the first rollouts of Maven 2 was in openEJB. And so he and Brett Porter basically rewrote our whole build system.
Okay.
And a lot of the stuff that they did in openEJB got pulled into what became the Apache parent palm. So you know how like one project is typically the project that eventually gets abstracted out and everyone then that's the parent palm and everyone's using that one. That came from openEJB.
Okay.
And Jason Van Zyl who did that. So he was a mentor on openEJB when we joined Apache. So we were at Codehouse, so we switched from Codehouse to Apache. When we did that, he became one of the champions on the project because you need to have 3 of them to join the Apache incubator.
Okay.
And he was one of the 3. Brett was another one, and Henry Andel was the 3rd. And so Jason and Brett, basically did all of the release. They created the release plugin there, and so like so we were the first guinea pigs. But that's because we saw each other all the time.
Yeah.
So it was a really ideal situation.
When IBM bought Geronimo, you remember that? Which year?
That was May 5th, 2005.
2005. Okay.
Yeah, 555.
Yeah. Okay.
That was we had shirts printed. And so
it
was.
Do you have still the shirt?
Somewhere.
Okay.
Somewhere in a box.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
And
so yeah.
You stayed with IBM 7 years. For 7 years, 2013, you said.
Until 2012.
12. Okay.
Yep.
And you kept working Geronimo all the time.
Well, I worked on Geronimo for all of that 7 years, except for like the last year I worked on Open Liberty. But Liberty. It wasn't called Open Liberty at the time. It wasn't open source. It was only like a team of like 12 people at that time. But yeah, I stayed there because it kept me very close to openEJB because openEJB was used in Geronimo. And I've been working on openEJB since I was married, and I had and I would call it an irrational attachment to seeing it succeed. And the project had been big and then died off. And then I wanted for it to have its glory day. And so Dane eventually left IBM, and we worked on what became openEJB 3, and we restored all of the glory of it with being an embeddable EJB container. And I think that's about the time that I met you. Is in the openEJB 3 days when I was talking about, hey, you can take something that looks kind of like an app server and embed it in your JVM, and it does work. And we're talking about embeddable EJB containers. Reza Rahman and I did a Java 1 talk on that concept, and so we started to get that going, and I knew that we had something that was basically like a Tomcat integration. If we're going to put EJB containers into app servers, why not have a default integration with Tomcat? Because why not? It's the most popular thing.
Well, to ask one question, why IBM bought Geronimo?
Yeah, well, that's an important. So basically, JBoss was running amok of the industry at that time and taking everyone's lunch, eating everybody's lunch. So. People were leaving WebSphere and WebLogic for JBoss on the regular, and IBM wanted to have an answer for that, right? So if they're going to lose the technical role from WebSphere let's try to get those people to leave to go somewhere else still inside IBM.
Okay.
Right? So they basically bought Geronimo to be the thing that when people are fed up with WebSphere and they're leaving and they're waving on the way out the door, the sales team would grab them by the back of the neck and go, "Hold on, we got this other thing," and try to pull them back into the room, sit them down, and give them the Geronimo sales pitch.
Mm-hmm.
And so it didn't sell a lot because it was only a last resort sale, and so therefore it was, slowly kind of got cannibalized over a period of time and inside IBM. And we had a very large team at the beginning, and then a very small team at the end of that 7 years. And eventually, it got pulled into Liberty and dissolved completely.
Yeah, this is why I actually tried the Geronimo multiple times, because I always wanted to be neutral, and I use Whitefly and JBoss a lot. And Glassfish was already around, I think. Glassfish 1.
It was like 2006.
Yeah. Glassfish, Whitefly. I didn't like Glassfish. Glassfish 1 I ignored a little bit. I did a Whitefly. And WebLogic.
That was like 2007.
Yeah, WebLogic a lot. Actually, I liked WebLogic. This was a great application.
Me too.
The version 8 was great, and then it just went downhill from there. So lots of projects with WebLogic, and WebSphere never too much, just task forces. I never created a greenfield project with WebSphere. And then there was Geronimo, and I was really curious because I knew you could buy support from IBM for Geronimo. And I was a consultant, so I can say, okay, if you are an IBM shop, there's also Geronimo, so you can buy it. But I didn't like it. So usually I can explain my clients why to use WebLogic or JBoss. There was always a story behind or a killer use case, but there was nothing in Geronimo. It was just complicated. I didn't like it. So this is why. But I really tried hard because
I appreciate it, but I also didn't like it. You know what I mean? So, we had a real opportunity, but we just didn't. We wasted it. You know what I mean? With developing the wrong thing.
And what I found right now on my blog, the first post was from 2009, and earlier I already used openEJB, and I use openEJB for testing.
Yeah.
Because you could, right now I see the source code, new initial context lookup, hello, be local, and you had it. So it was like 3 lines of code. Yeah. And you can just put the EJB, and it was very fast. And back then, already the people were saying, application servers were slow. And I say, this is not true because, I mean, it boots very fast. I mean, we have a WebSphere, okay, but I mean, WebSphere was strange. What I remember, in a project, I was hired to do the new architecture. And this was like Java E5 or 6. And I really wanted to do the new architecture, so I needed the new EJB container. And there was like a service pack for the WebSphere. And I said, not a problem, we can download that. And the service pack was like 1.5 gigabytes. So for now, it's not much. But back then, 1.5 gigabytes, I said, this is impossible because I knew that the same thing in Glassfish, like 700K. So the entire EJB container in Glassfish was 680 kilobytes. And I had no idea what is inside. So until now, this for me is not. This is impossible to imagine. 1.5 gigabyte of bytecode for an EJB patch. Impossible.
There were 600 people working on WebSphere. Yeah. So that's crazy. Why there's a lot of code, right?
Yeah. And and then we met, and I was never I never understood your idea of deep pluggability because I was from complete different directions. So I was from application developer or consultant, and you were a container provider, and we met several times at Java 1. I remember it was Dan Allen. This was this is like late party. So this was after I was probably 12 at night. 2011, you mean?
No, it would have been like 9 or 10.
Yeah, this is, and I think it's like, why you are not creating an application server? Because I mean, the openEJB is there, it's very fast, and your answer was, you can do it. Just pick the pieces and you have it. It's like, yeah, but this isn't how it works. People would like to have a logo or would have to something, and I exactly remember. And what after the conversation with you, I don't understand this because you are not you come from business, right? And you are very skilled, obviously, with design and art, and right now you could just do it, great website which looks great and it's already half done, I would say, right? If something looks good and feels good, And we had a conversation, and you were absolutely not understanding what I'm saying. It's like, you have to do this. No one will, create their own application servers. And by the way, it was also against my belief. Until now, I don't like to create unique snowflakes for my clients. What I really like, create exactly the same boring stuff for every client. So if they have a problem for the boring stuff, they can go to Stack Overflow and get the answers. And if they have more severe problems, they can ask me, but they don't have to ask me if there's a class loading problem with two pieces which don't fit together, right? And I tried to convince you, and that was also...
You convinced me eventually.
Okay.
You just didn't know it.
Okay.
So those conversations were like in the 2009 range.
Okay.
And it's Dan Allen and those guys. I knew them because we kind of, we had sort of a good relationship going on over Twitter in that time, and they were working on Arquillian, and they tried. It's not a well-known fact, but like the first, say, like 6 months that they were demoing Arquillian, anytime there was EJB stuff involved, they were not showing JBoss. They were showing openEJB.
Okay.
So that's why Arquillian looked. Oh, they can test with Arquillian an EJB app in like 1 second or a half a second. It's amazing. Yeah, it was openEJB under there.
Okay.
That's what they were testing. Then that team started working on Wildfly, which was they started working on JBoss 7, which is a complete rewrite or a rewrite of some magnitude. I don't know how much, but and then that's how they got their second startup. And then after 6 months, when JBoss 7 was finally finished, then they switched over from openEJB to showing JBoss 7, which became Wildfly. And anyway, so yeah, but you did convince me, because I continued like that until 2010, and after Java 1 at Java 1 2010, Linda DeMichel, she tried to recruit me to be the EJB spec lead, because Ken Sachs had left Oracle after the sale of Sun to Oracle. So he left.
I forgot Ken. He was a really nice guy.
Yeah, so Ken Sachs and I did a lot of work on EJB 3.1. It was basically the two of us did a significant amount of work on that. Singletons, the schedule API with the @schedule annotation, the transaction, the thread locking with lock read, lock write, all that stuff, and the embeddable EJB container, obviously. So all that stuff was stuff Ken and I worked on together. So he was always talking about me, and then he left, and I was in a BOF on the panel of the EJB expert group, and people were asking questions, and I had great answers. And Linda, she was like, "Wow, that was so fantastic. Let's get you to be the EJB spec leads," because she didn't want to be the spec lead. She had JPA that she was working on. She preferred to do that. She didn't want to be running EJB anymore. And so, I said no. And then the next day I said yes, because I thought, well, this is an opportunity I really can't pass up. And then I said no again. And because the bittersweet thing, I would have had to have stopped working on openEJB, and I would have had to have actually competed against it.
Okay.
So all the people that I recruited to work on the project would have to watch me leave the project and then compete against them. And I just couldn't bring myself to do that, because I literally recruited these people, and I told them, you can achieve amazing things if we work together, and then I'm going to go leave and then suck it. Strongest wins. That's that. I couldn't do that. So I turned that job down. But it really lit a fire under me. Like, if I'm going to turn jobs like that down, I got to kick it into overdrive. I got to really make this. I got to play all the cards that I've been holding. So that was when we decided to make TomEE. So basically, right after that, October 2010, Java 1, we got into making TomEE, and we named it first a terrible name, but then we eventually, yeah, you remember, we first gave it a really bad name, and then we came up with TomEE as our second choice, and then we started working on it, and learning from the Geronimo lesson, we weren't loud about it. We didn't talk about it too much. We wanted to wait till it was finished and then pull the lid off and go, ta-da, which we did do. So that whole year of 2011, we were just working like crazy on TomEE. And I was still at IBM at the time. And basically, I had to get permission, like 3 managers up the chain to do this. So I was like, I'm going to either leave to work on it, or I'm going to stay to work on it with your permission. But I'm going to be loud about it. So you can't tell me to stop, because, you can't tell me to do it quietly, because eventually we're going to be very loud about this. So you got to be okay with that. And they were. And I got that permission. And so, yeah, I had to work on it all my spare time. But yeah, I got it. So I did, myself and, a handful of people, Jonathan Gallimore, Jean-Louis Montero, Roman Manibucao. We would always be getting together at conferences or just making our own event to get together. And, in 2011, we spent 1 week working in Tour de France on TomEE. And that was the first time many of us had met in person.
Okay.
And like the first time we met in person, we were taking a week of vacation to get together and flying to France to work on TomEE, having never met in person before. I met Jonathan Gallimore, a few months before, because I was in Italy for my 10th wedding anniversary.
What was the impression of the guys? You met, your co-workers the very first time. So what was the impression? So this is always fun,
I mean, we had an amazing time.
Okay.
I mean, like that week is still like one of the most cherished memories that we all have still to this day, right? Because it's really special when a bunch of people who have never met want to do something so badly that they're willing to use their vacation time to do it and pay money to someone who's a software developer by day dreaming of being a software developer on vacation.
Yeah.
That's such a weird thing, right?
Yeah.
So we got together, and I had written this test harness called gbuild, and we used it in Geronimo a brief period of time in the earlier days, but I dusted it off and I repurposed it for Amazon AWS. And so that week, we were doing 2 TCK runs a day, entire TCK runs a day, because I was basically launching off like 100 instances in AWS, and we would just chew through the TCK. So we would get together and we would code for the morning. We would run the TCK at lunch, and we would be refreshing the screen while we're eating and just like, yeah, our test, like this test I was working on is good, and then we would code the whole afternoon, and then we would kick off a TCK run at 5 or something and go have beers and be looking at our phones, watching the numbers roll in while we're having beers in downtown Tour de France.
I assume in JBuild there was some shell code generation involved, right?
Not in that one. That one, that one was like I had to meticulously write by hand, because it was just like, not as, yeah, it was gbuild, yeah, but it was originally called gbuild for Geronimo build, but
gbuild. I thought JBuild, so gbuild, okay.
Yeah, but anyway, we still use it, but it's all closed source now. So
okay.
Yeah, it was a good time. We got from 40% TCK compliant to 80% TCK compliant by the end of that week.
And how successful was TomEE? Was it like commercial success from the beginning, or did it met your expectation, or what's the story behind?
Well, I mean, technically, great success. Huge success technically. People were using it at scale and still do, and obviously it's a lot of places. And so, technically it was a great success, but people were so used to open source software being developed by companies and being able to just take it for granted, that when something came into their lives that was developed by people in their spare time, they really didn't understand that I need to help these people. So nobody helped us.
Okay.
Period. So I wouldn't say nobody. We did, we did get some traction early on. So one of the things that but not at the scale we needed. So we ultimately, when we launched off TomEE Tribe, we were a consulting company for the first several years, and which didn't give us a lot of time to work on TomEE itself because we were developing software for other people. Can you imagine in your busy day job and then developing an open source app server in spare time? That's really difficult.
Yeah.
Right. So if people had gotten wiser sooner, we're great. Like TomEE Tribe as a company, we're fantastic. We don't do any consulting.
Okay.
We're all support based. So we around I want to say 2017 we slowly tapered off and switched over, and we did some consulting a bit, but the last like 5 years or less like I want to say 4 years, just 100% support. And so
for,
that's
for
what's
which products, for what support? So which products are supported by a company?
Well, TomEE, of course.
Yeah.
Tomcat by naturally. For Tomcat, it's a lot of what people need is CVE patching, critical vulnerability patching, right? They're typically using some discontinued version of Tomcat because there are many, right? And then it's running in production and then no one's patching it, so they need that kind of stuff from us. And ActiveMQ, we get a lot of ActiveMQ business these days.
Okay.
I want to say like 50% of what comes our way these days is ActiveMQ business. We just don't have any problems landing that business. The majority of the people who ask end up buying. And because ActiveMQ it runs perfectly fine, and then it just gets stuck.
Yeah, and ActiveMQ is even it is a managed ActiveMQ on AWS, right? So you can even
Amazon has Amazon MQ.
Yeah.
And so so they're also the Amazon's putting resources into ActiveMQ. We're doing our best and working in ActiveMQ. And the thing that I would want to do the most, or that I want to do and are planning to do the most, is JMS or Jakarta messaging. Got a lot of ideas on what would be really awesome features for Jakarta messaging. Like, obviously,
before we do this, because there is no time for that, and I will have to re-invite you just to talk exclusively about microprofile in Jakarta EE, if you like. So we have another. Oh, not today. This will go too late.
Yeah,
but what
yeah.
me about the TomEE. So what are hidden or killer features from TomEE? So obviously it is Jakarta E9, right? It supports Jakarta E9, the last one.
Yeah, we support 9.1. It's still the one of the lightest app servers out there in terms of speed and memory footprint. Obviously, startup time and all that stuff. So obviously Quarkus is not.
Yeah, give me
possible.
some numbers. Startup times. What is startup time from empty one?
From an empty one, it's 2 seconds.
Okay.
So I'm actually disappointed in the 2 second number because it used to be lower, but we've had some more scanning stuff that because of microprofile features that have been added, so that needs to be retuned. So as soon as I can get in there and retune it, it'll be back down to its regular super fast startup time. Memory, I mean, like you can run the whole thing and under what used to be the default JVM settings, which was 64 megabytes. We used to pass the entire GCK with 64 megabytes of memory. So I mean, like, they didn't make an AWS image small enough for us to ever have a problem. And so its memory footprint is still very, 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 very small.
Actually, you could run the entire TomEE as AWS Lambda.
Likely. Yeah.
Would be a cool use case, actually.
I mean, I should probably listen to you this time, right?
Yeah, this just an idea. I don't know how successful it is, from
I don't know what the business model for that would be, right? It's sort of like, but yeah.
We have a business model. I mean, this is the direction the cloud is going. And I think there are, and you mentioned JMS, but this is dangerous to talk about that because it's 2 hours, and this was really interesting because if you combine JMS with Lambda and cloud events, this could be a really interesting stuff what we could actually do right now. But now I would like to promote to TomEE a little bit because the Jakarta is somehow boring. So I would expect it knows about Jakarta in MicroProfile 4, I would suspect, right?
So we're working our way up. So we just got certified. So TomEE Apache in general lost access to the TCK in 2013 before Java EE7.
Mm-hmm.
So we did this big splash with TomEE and then immediately lost access to the TCK. It was super frustrating and really, really, really just wanted to tear my hair out. So we worked so hard on it and lost access to the TCK. We stayed in the game. We kept working. We kept doing releases. We kept working on it, but we couldn't run the TCK. So we eventually got access to the TCK, in December of 2019 is when that EE8, Jakarta EE8 TCK got released. So we got caught up on that. So we got caught up on Jakarta EE. We're 9.1 compliant, which is the Jakarta namespace version. And then now we're working on getting caught up on the micro-profile side of the fence.
Okay.
So right now we're at 2, but we need to get all the way up to 4. 4 was just released, or is being released at this moment.
And you are using your own micro-profile implementation or small, right?
Nope, we're using our own. So TomEE is really interesting in that regard. If you look at what's inside the app servers that are out there, Jakarta has 16 certified app servers. TomEE is one of them. 15 of them use use Weld, and TomEE uses openWebBeans. Right? 15 of them use the Eclipse JSON-P and JSON-B provider. Right? TomEE uses Apache Johnson.
It means that you can actually serialize Java records into JSON, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes, JSON-P is a object to
no, I know it, but the Johnson from Eclipse, I think
no, it's Apache Johnson.
Apache is able to Java records from Java 16.
Yeah, it does support that. Yes,
it serializes them one-to-one to JSON, which is way ahead.
Yeah,
JSON-B. Yeah.
So to be honest, we have a lot of app servers, but under the covers of these app servers, 95% of them are using the same open source code. And so therefore we have this ecosystem of creating standards so we can encourage multiple implementations, but we're not achieving it.
Yeah. Maybe Pioneer a little bit, right? They have their own micro-profile implementation and they are still using Weld, but at least micro-profile they implemented that.
Well, micro-profile, I can't comment, but in terms of the Jakarta stuff, it's the same Glassfish components that all the other 15 use, right?
Yeah.
So I
asked them about micro-profile, and interestingly, they implemented micro-profile from scratch, which surprised me.
That's wonderful. Okay. Yeah, that's
great.
Why
didn't you use them small, right? And they say, because we would like to have control over it, and this was nice.
And it's not a matter of control. I mean, that's a good reason, but we create standards so that we can have multiple implementations,
exactly.
so they can compete on ideas, right? You say Jakarta is boring, and that's because all 15 of the 16 are using the same component. So therefore, where are our ideas going to come from?
I would say Jakarta has to be boring because for me as application developer, what I expect, one dependency, I focus on business logic.
Well, that's great, but boring in the terms of stable, but not boring in the terms of lacking in new ideas.
The new ideas have to be available across all implementation. Then it's boring again.
Yeah, right. But again, if we're achieving that by not having multiple implementations, then we're not competing on ideas. We're not competing on features. We're competing on branding and price.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I'm with you absolutely.
And
but
so
the selling point, no kidding, in my projects is
we just use it and don't think about it.
Yeah, I think we should use it, but I think we should think about it, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that if first of all, TomEE has almost no code, has very little code in common with all the other app servers. Is like if TomEE were to disappear, we would lose the majority of our diversity because the other 15 share so much in common in terms of just not developing new implementations of any new specs, right?
So the TomEE is the Firefox, right?
Pretty much, you know, like we try to select Apache implementations of all the stuff, and we make them where they don't exist, you know. And so it has an implementation of CDI, bean validation, JSON P, JSON B, and its own implementations, and all other 15 use the same implementation, right? And we use CXF, and the only other server to use CXF is OpenLiberty, but they're switching away from CXF to rest easy to align up with JBoss more, right? So we'll be the only ones using CXF. You know, so we invest, for our size, like as we invest incredible amounts in actually creating implementations of these specifications. So there is at least more than one implementation of every specification.
Yeah.
And if we didn't do that, there wouldn't be.
Yeah. But why are you doing this? Just to, encourage the open source idea, or you believe your implementation is better than the others, right?
Well, we believe our implementation is better, of course.
Yeah, of course.
And because that's the point of a standard, right?
Yeah.
If the standard doesn't have multiple implementations, that might as well just be a project.
Yeah, you're right. No, you're right? Absolutely right. I just wanted to
Linux,
understand.
Linux there's no standard for Linux. It's just an implementation.
But if you would like to try now to sell TomEE in a company, you cannot argument, I implemented everything to be different.
It's better.
Yeah,
well, exactly. There's a reason that we start up so fast, and the other ones don't.
Yeah,
start up as fast. There's a reason that we consume less memory, right? We're able to achieve these things because we've chosen different ingredients to make our server.
I had a conversation with OpenLiberty as well, and they also implement a lot of microprofile by themselves and don't use SmallRye everywhere. And they say because it's too generic. So SmallRye comes, with a generic API, and this is not always suitable for them internally. So it's also interesting,
You can offer real value to people, by implementing the specifications and making the integration between these things better, right?
Okay, so what we learned, TomEE, is small. It is a little bit different because this is a clean room implementation of these specs from various Apache projects. It comes with Jakarta E and microprofile 3 dot something support, which is great because the Jakarta E is a little bit, I would say, the boring operating system, and microprofile is more like the cloud features like metrics and stuff, which is more still boring, but more exciting because it changes more often because it's CNCF. And then what are the proprietary features now? What is now? You say, okay, now forgot the standards. So what do we get on top of that? Because there are a couple of interesting projects.
We do have some interesting things. So like our implementation of microprofile JWT is probably the best implementation out there. Not even to put the humility aside. So we support the idea that you can use bean validation annotations to validate your JWT.
Nice.
Right. So a JWT is a data object, right? It's a map of names and values, and bean validation.
I have to interrupt you there now.
Go ahead.
I was at Java 1, and I was in your talk.
Yeah.
About maybe this, about state, JSON Web Tokens, and you started, explaining that if with JSON Web Token you have the state, and you had some different idea how to do this.
It's basically a signed cookie.
Yeah, exactly. And there was one guy beside me, and he touched my shoulder, and I had no idea who he is. And he looked at me and told me, "I love this guy." Okay. He was very excited about your talk, exactly about that. And this was a great session. This was also Java 1. It was recent one. This was one of the last Java ones. And it was funny and it was great. And go ahead. So
so a JSON Web Token is a signed cookie.
Yeah.
To be fancy, it's a JSON. It's a map of a JSON map.
Yeah.
It's signed, so therefore we trust the data, and we use public-private keys, so that way I can give you the signed thing. You can't make the signed thing, but I can verify that I made it. And so if you change it, I throw it away, right? Anyway, so it's a data object, is what it is. It's a signed, trustable, network transportable data object. So why are we doing this whole roles allowed stuff? I mean, that's fine, but there are a lot of data in this object. Why is it just we're looking at the roles in the object? That's such a narrow, old school perspective on technology. It's not even. It's like that's what we've been doing since 2000. Why are we still doing that? Right? I can understand what is username and password. Then I go look up into a database, and I don't want to look up 20,000 things. But a JSON Web Token has all this data in it, and you can add more data to it. So what we thought we want to do is basically use bean validation annotations to say yes or no, I want to accept this token based upon the data that's in it. And so our microprofile JWT implementation will first validate that the token is good, right? It's not expired. The signature is okay. That's what the microprofile JWT specification says. And the microprofile JWT specification says you can do roles allowed, and then that stops. But what we can do is say, I want a token that has, the issuer be this value, and you can write bean validation annotation to say that, put that bean validation annotation on your method, and then reject the token if it doesn't have that. Or you
could you also write a bean validation on custom data inside the token? Let's say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
This is great.
So you can put your own custom data in the JSON Web Token, create your own custom bean validation annotations to verify that data, put those annotations on your method, and then use that to say yes or no that I want to accept this. And the greatest thing about bean validation is that if you have, like, say, 5 different things that you want to check, bean validation does allow you to make one annotation, put those 5 on it, and then have that. So you could literally have like 5 or 10 different constraints that you're checking, but there's one top-level bean validation annotation on your method, checking them all, because all the other annotations are on that annotation. And it's like the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
So, like, that is such a killer feature. And at some point, when we get the time, we will add it to the micro profile JWT specification. I did work on that specification. The 1.1 version, I wrote all the new text for that. And so, but at some point we will add that into the, propose that to be added to the microprofile JWT specification. But for now, it's a feature inside TomEE that works, and it's great. And it's one of my favorite features in there, because I'm really into security these days.
What you have with this is almost like the YAML on AWS, the access manager, because you can look into custom stuff and combine it with existing stuff, because what you have already the request scope, the context, so you could actually say I'm the user and the principal, maybe even use some additional data and what's coming, over the wire with JSON Web Token. You can, combine both and decide is it allowed or not. So just
absolutely. So
great idea. By the way, the combining bean validation with JSON Web Token, not obvious to me, but should be obvious, but wasn't.
Now that it's spoken, you're like, why are we doing this?
Yeah, exactly.
Why isn't this everywhere?
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's one of the features I'm most proud of. Wrote that one like about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
And so it's in there, and it's super fantastic. So if you've got a gateway or a JWT provider that allows you to put data into your token, it's such a killer feature, because
everyone loves you this, right? I think everyone.
Absolutely. That's right. Yeah. And so, if you've got custom business data in there, you're obviously putting it in there for a reason.
Yeah.
Right? You want to act on it when the request comes in.
Yeah.
Well, if you can act on it and you can filter out stuff by making annotations and just slap the annotations on stuff, it's so much better.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have like a servlet filter that filters this stuff out, because it's really difficult to pin a servlet filter to one specific method and have a different method have a different security requirement.
Yeah.
Your servlet filter then has to know about all your endpoints and go, oh, it's that endpoint, then I got to go follow this branch of logic. Oh, it's that JAX-RS endpoint, I got to follow that branch of logic. Well, you can have all those logics described in bean validation annotations, just apply the right one to the individual methods, and it's just the one annotation if you want it to be. Or it could be several if you want, but it could be just one because you can wrap them up, and it's really, really fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, you are absolutely right. It rolls allowed. It is role-based access control, which is fine. But in JSON Web Token, we have far more data than just the principal and the group, which maps to role. So there's far more data, and we are not using this effectively.
Yeah, and not to mention that if you do use roles allowed, you're putting several strings inside there, and you're copying and pasting those strings everywhere. So if you wanted to rename the role, you got a lot of find and replace to do.
Yeah, you're right.
And if you type it incorrectly, guess what happens? Nobody gets in.
It's very secure then.
Well, yeah, very secure, but maybe bad for business, right?
Yeah.
No one's paying us.
I really have to reinvite you back and talk about Jakarta crazy ideas with TomEE and the hidden features of TomEE, far more than this. Where people can find your company, the services, or TomEE Tribe.
Yep. So it's TomEEtribe.com, TomEEtribe, and everything's there on the front page. So, ActiveMQ, Tomcat, TomEE, we support those things. We do have an API gateway that we wrote that does do these crazy fun things with putting data in there. And so if people want something that's kind of like a developer-oriented API gateway, let us know. We can help you with that. One of the things that I really like about our gateway is that you can have multiple microservices in the backend feeding data into the JSON Web Token.
Okay.
And you can have several different profiles of JSON Web Token. And so you can say, hey, when this client shows up, this OAuth 2 client shows up, contact these 3 microservices and get them to feed data in. We will give them, okay, this is the person who's logging in. We've verified their information, and go ahead and what information do you think should be in their token? And the microservices can feed data in, and so therefore it's like the best developer experience possible, because it's not then just a security token. It does give the backend, the microservices who will potentially see the token in the future, it gives them the ability to inject data into the token. So you don't have to write your own OAuth 2 implementation just to get that capability.
It's like the data provider becomes a microservice, so you can just
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So
it's really cool. And it does support mod rewrites. Like Apache has mod rewrite routing capabilities. So you can say when the URL pattern matches this, it must have this kind of token or that kind of token or these roles or that, And so you can do, basically it's like being able to do mod rewrite and attach specific security requirements to individual rules.
So you have now your own product.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
What's your Twitter account?
It's dblevins, DBLEVINS .com, just DBLEVINS, dblevins.
Perfect.
First initial, last name.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Great.